All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word verse by verse. Excuse me, verse by verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we continue in our study, verse by verse, through the Gospel of Matthew. We are in chapter 27, and have Jesus been arrested, of course, being betrayed by Judas, one of his own disciples, and he was arrested, and he appeared during the night, during the wee hours of the morning. Actually, you can call it two hearings. One was before Caiaphas, and the other one Annas. The idea was to trump up charges to present to Pilate. The Jews could not execute anyone, and the Pharisees dared not. They had a good thing going. They had a good thing going with Rome, and so they dare not risk. They dare not risk the Romans coming in and invading. Well, when I say invading, taking more control. And as long as they kind of abided with Rome, Rome didn't care what they did, and they did a lot of evil, but Rome didn't care about that. As long as they paid their taxes, okay, it was fine. So there was a lot of oppression with the people, but the idea of that from the Pharisees or the Sanhedrin, they enjoyed a lot of freedom, it's the same as Herod. So after the bogus trial, they are now presenting Jesus to Pilate. Pilate has to sign off on it, and so in respect now this becomes a Roman trial, and ultimately, of course, execution. So we're going to pick it up in verse number 11. And if you remember Judas having an attack of conscience, but Judas, his character is he was always a thief, and there are those who try to say that Judas did what he did out of noble means. The scriptures doesn't say that. He was a thief. He was a person who, and this is something that speaks more to the sinful, depraved heart. That that in itself is unbelievable. That you can, of course, be with Jesus for 2.5 years, and then still betray him. Unbelievable. But it also, we saw last time that it his heart never changed. In other words, yeah, it looks like he did have a attack of conscience. He was remorseful. He knew that he was betraying innocent blood, of course, along the Son of God, the Messiah. But he didn't change his heart. And I kind of went through this before. It kind of reminded me of King Saul, the first king, David's predecessor. He had a evil heart as well, where he, in spite of doing wrong, knowing he did wrong, he never repented. And Judas didn't repent. Judas he hung himself, and that kind of shows you the evilness in his heart. So, verse 11. It says, now Jesus stood before the governor. Are you the king of the Jews? The governor asked him. Now, Rome did not care about Jewish laws. Jewish laws had absolutely nothing to do with Roman law. They didn't care. In other words, Jesus is really, by this question we see, he's not being tried because he violated the the Jewish law in any aspect. So he could have blasphemed God. He could have done he could have violated any of the Jewish laws that even called for the death penalty. And under Roman law, that had nothing to do with it. So if Jesus had violated the Sabbath day as, excuse me, as the Pharisees accused him of, and even if you go back to the trial, remember what they accused Jesus of being worthy of death. Okay, what they accused Jesus of being worthy of death was that he said, I will destroy the temple and I will raise it up in 3 days. And they said, that's blasphemy. He deserves death, even though really it's not. Under the Mosaic law, that's still not even worthy of death. The fact that he did that, okay, working on the Sabbath, if Jesus was actually working on the Sabbath, that would be worthy of death. But under Roman law, you could enforce it. You could violate every law that God said under the Mosaic law that called for the death penalty. And under Roman law, unless Pilate signs off on it, they couldn't enforce it. And that's important to understand. So they had to kind of cook the books, as it were. In other words, he's not being tried for Jewish law, and when they present the case to Pilate, Pilate can care less about their law. He said, so what, But he did ask them a question, and this question came about as, are you the king of the Jews? Now, Rome was very interested in that because they did not tolerate sedition. And the Jews were known from that. We'll see this later on in a moment. Later down in the chapter, they were a pain in the butt to Rome. But the one thing that Rome didn't tolerate, again, they didn't. If a person, as I said, when they would conquer a society, a nation, a tribe, or whatever, once you were conquered, then the Rome would sometimes let them have freedom to whatever culture, whatever God, whatever religion. You just had to bow to Rome. But the one thing they didn't tolerate, again, was whether or not insurrection or any kind of way disrespect to Rome, not submitting to Rome. Those were the things, and this is what gets Pilate's attention right here. So he says, Jesus answered, you have said it. In verse 12 he says, and while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he didn't answer. Then Pilate said to him, do you hear how much they are testifying against you? But he didn't answer him even one charge. So the governor was greatly amazed. Now, so I'm kind of going to throw in some other stuff in terms of the other Gospels. Luke Gospel gives us probably a more detailed accounting of these events. In fact, Luke's Gospel, there's a difference in how Jewish tells the story. So, for example, you go back to in Genesis, you see Genesis states, like Genesis 1 states the creation, and then in Genesis 2 it comes back and gives a couple of details that it wants to focus on. Here we see Matthew telling certain events that he's focusing on. This is what he just wants to focus on, right? Under the inspiration of God, he just wants to focus on these things. Well, Luke is going to give us a lot more detail, and so we get also kind of a little insight into the political nature from a Gentile perspective. So we know that the Pilate, they had to have even a case to bring to Pilate. Just like our judicial system, you have to have a case to bring to Pilate. So what is kind of interesting is that the case that they formatted in at Caiaphas and Annas' house is not necessarily the case that they're presenting to Pilate. Why? Because Rome didn't care about the Jewish affairs. So it comes down to what they're kind of trying to say to Pilate is that this man is, he is, not only is he violating our law, but then he is, he's committing treason against Rome. Now, under the Romans' law, they did allow the Jews to kind of somewhat carry out certain of the laws. It just wasn't the death penalty. And so the Jews were really pushing hard for the death penalty. And that's what kind of perplexing to Pilate. Pilate could have said, well, judge him according to your own law. I don't care about that. But they couldn't, again, they could not execute. And they are pushing hard because of their hatred. And even Pilate will recognize this. And we'll see this in a moment. Now, verse 15 says, at the festival, the governor's custom was to release to the crowd a prisoner they wanted. In other words, commuting. We call it today that they would commute a prisoner. We've seen the president do that. Every president, of course, they do that. And it's a kind of an act of mercy, which you could say. Even though there are certain criteria that they had to meet, still was act of mercy. Now, another thing is that, and well, let me go on and read this because I think he states it right here. It says, at the festival, verse 15 again, at the festival, the governor's custom was to release to the crowd a prisoner they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they gathered together, Pilate said to them, who is it you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who was called the Messiah? For he knew, meaning Pilate, he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. So this is telling right here that they were pushing so hard to crucify Jesus, they did not have a case. They didn't have a case, and yet they're pushing hard to crucify Jesus. There was other things that, history kind of tells us about Pilate. Pilate was kind of in trouble with Rome. Pilate could not afford an uprising. The Judean rulership wasn't the most coveted. It's like, okay, this is where you are assigning me. On top of that, the Jews were a pain, but as I said, they were trouble. Pilate knew that the Pharisees had handed him over for envy, they just said right here. But Pilate did not want to upset the Jews. He did not want to alienate the Jews. So basically, he tried a stunt here that kind of backfires on him. Because he says, wait a minute, you're presenting this man to me. Pilate doesn't even know that much about Jesus. Now, we said this, even if you go back, Herod didn't know that much about Jesus. And really you have to understand their isolation from the common people. They were basically in their palace and stuff like that. They went out among the people. Every now and then you would hear things, but not much. But Pilate knew that they didn't have a case. They knew that it was just plain envy. Notice it was just plain envy that they were handing Jesus over. They hated Jesus. Jesus is not making it easier because he's not even defended himself. I mean, really, Jesus could have just simply said they're lying. And Pilate was actually looking for Jesus to do that. It's like, come on, say something. Come on, because he knew. And he didn't really want to crucify an innocent man. That he knew this man was innocent. Jesus is not making it easy for him. So he says, okay, I tell you what, we got this custom, right? We commute a person's sentence. Okay, let's hold up Barabbas. Barabbas was truly guilty. Now, in Pilate's mind, he's, at least from the text right here, it's like, for sure they're going to say, release Jesus, right? This innocent man. For sure they're going to do that. And Pilate's going to get the shock of his life when they don't, okay? And of course, This is all, of course, preordained from God, but it's 18 is very interesting. For he knew he handed him over because of envy, so he knew he was innocent. Now here is where politics, or we could say the reality of life, right? Life isn't fair. Life is evil. Life is sinful. We have the same conditions today. Life isn't fair. Okay. We oftentimes fall for idealism more than reality. This is reality. Pilate could have probably ended it himself. He could have said, you know what, y'all got a bogus case, get out of here. But Pilate probably couldn't afford the political fallout. And actually, we're going to see this down in this chapter. Let's see here. All right, verse 19. He says, while he was sitting on the judge's bench, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for today I've suffered terribly in a dream because of him. Kind of interesting thing right here. His wife sends to him that, look, I've been having dreams about this guy. And in a sense, legally it means nothing. However, it goes to what Pilate is also feeling in his gut. Verse 20, the chief priests and the elders, however, persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and execute Jesus. The governor asked them, which of the two do you want me to release for you? Barabbas, they answered. Pilate asked them, what should I do with Jesus, who is called Messiah? They all answered, crucify him. Then he said, why? What has he done wrong? But they kept shouting, crucify him all the more. Now this is astounding. I can't help but to look at certain events that you see happening in our political landscape. And it's all over a lie, oh, hey, Sister Tamara, yes. Thank you for that. God bless you. All right, so, yeah, this is interesting here that they would, you see the crowd, how easy the crowd is persuaded. Remember, some of these people had been healed by Jesus just recently, but then remember the last 6 months he fed 4,000, 5,000, and yet now this crowd being motivated, how easy it was for them to change and to say crucify him. And Pilate is kind of like baffled by himself, like, what? Why? Because it kind of made things worse. So verse 23 again, he said, why? What has he done wrong? But they kept shouting, crucify him all the more. It says, and when Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that a riot was starting instead, he took some water and washed his hands in front of the crowd and said, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself. And all the people answered, his blood be upon us and on our children. Then he released Barabbas to them. But after having Jesus flogged, he handed him over to be crucified. Now, if you remember back in chapter 26, the Jewish soldiers also slapped Jesus around and beat him. But this, again, is Pilate, when he had Jesus flogged, again, Luke is going to give us more detail. Pilate is, and at some point, is really trying to not crucify Jesus. Luke tells us that he has Jesus flogged, and then he brings him back and says, look at this man right here. And Luke goes into more detail, like, I'm not finding anything worthy of death in this man, but they keep shouting, crucify him. The Romans, the flogging was a lot more, it was more severe than the Jewish flogging. Under the Jewish law, you can only give someone 40 stripes. As a practice, the Jews would probably give 39, just they don't want to miscount and go, yep, I gave you 41. But the Romans had no such limitations. They give you as many lashes as what they wanted, and it was a lot more brutal. They used a whip called a calenine tail. It had three straps to it, embedded sometimes with bones and metal, things like that. So then when it would strike your back, it would lacerate your back so that it would tear your flesh open. And the fact that it was 3, you was actually getting like 3 for every one strike. So if they gave you 30 stripes, you was actually getting 90 lashes. So the whole process of this was actually very bloody and brutal. But he released Barabbas, and then of course he said, this is a murderer. Now, when Pilate says here, I am innocent of this man's blood, no, you're not before God. Okay. Now, because it was kind of a Jewish thing, again, Romans really didn't care. There was no recourse. Let's say if Jesus was to say, I'm going to try to appeal, there was no appeal. The only thing that could have happened if Jesus was a Roman citizen, then that would have been bad. But he wasn't, so he really didn't care. But on the one hand, Pilate is kind of like, I don't want to, there's no reason for me to execute this guy. All right, so now another interesting statement here is, look at this, verse 25. All the people answered, his blood be upon us and on our children. So that's kind of an interesting statement that they cried out. Now again, remember they're crying, that they shout this knowing who Jesus is. They shout this. This is, again, from a spiritual standpoint, bad for them. But it is interesting that they would again, the crowds. Now the Pharisees, and everybody knew the Pharisees hated Jesus. Everybody also knew the Pharisees were trying to kill Jesus. If you read in John chapter 8, and Jesus makes a statement, I know you're trying to kill me. And they go, pow, what, who? Well, you got a demon, who's trying to kill you? Everybody knew they were. They said it, they stated it. And so now they kind of found their way. Verse 27. Like I said, this kind of scene here kind of went on all morning, by the way. Early in the morning, so this kind of this trial here was a nightmare for Pilate in that, because he didn't want to crucify Jesus and had to. In fact, there were a couple of more things that happened in the course of this day. He actually sends Jesus to Herod. Herod was in Jerusalem at the time. And so he sends Jesus to Herod, and Herod, like, oh great, maybe he can work some miracles for me. And then again, Jesus did not answer him. He did not say a word to him, and then frustrated, Herod sends him back. So again, what I'm saying is this trial here, it is quite the spectacle, because Pilate is so baffled he doesn't know what to do. But in the end, of course, politics wins out. So they handed him over to be crucified. Verse 27, then the governor's soldiers took Jesus to the headquarters and gathered the whole company around him, stripped him and dressed him in a scarlet military robe. They twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and placed a reed in his right hand. Let me go here, 29. Verse 29. They twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and placed a reed in his right hand. And they knelt before him and mocked him and hailed, King of the Jews. And they spit on him and took the reed and kept hitting him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his clothes back on him and led him away to crucify him. So again, this is more sanitized because they actually beat Jesus. You can tell by the time next time you see Jesus, not only were they kind of beating him with the reed, but they would slap on him and spit on him, punch him in the face and stuff. So this was quite, again, brutal. And again, there was nothing anyone could do. In other words, there was no recourse here. Now, verse 32, and now let me just say this too about the crucifixion scene. Roman crucifixions were one of the most brutal in history. It was designed to discourage other criminals. So the crucifixion cross, if you go back and read, like in one particular case, actually a couple of centuries before, there was the uprising, and it was popularized in different movies and a television series, and that is Spartacus. It was a slave uprising, and these slaves kind of made some headway. They were never going to conquer Rome, but they had made some headway, and in the end, of course, Rome crushed the rebellion, and as a result, they crucified. They had a road where they lined thousands of crucifixions. I mean, these thousands of these rebel slaves, and that was a deterrent. And the crucifixion again was brutal because it was a wooden cross, and it wasn't, of course, the cross that you see in most pictures. So they didn't take these wood shops and sand them down and square them off. They were not. Again, it was when you couple this with the floggings, oftentimes, again, it was just stakes or wood put together, and when they would nail you to the cross, they was more, not so much as nails as much as spikes, and so usually probably about right here is where they put this spike with the bone. They would kind of fasten you to, so you could be fastened to the cross, okay, and then you would hang there, and oftentimes you can hang there for days. Now, with the case in Jesus' case, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, because they wanted to observe the Passover. The law says you couldn't have a person hanging on the tree or hanging up, period. So they persuaded that they would get them, pull them down from the cross. And we'll see how they would do that. They would break the legs of some, and then of course Jesus was already dead by the time they get there. But in just kind of Rome, you could hang up on a cross for days, and eventually suffocate, die of the brutality of the cross. So the procession here, they would again let you parade you through to show everyone this is the shame, this is a guilty person, this is a condemned person. And so, of course, Jesus here is being treated as a rank criminal. So it says here, verse 32, as they were going out, they found a Cyrenian man named Simon, and they forced this man to carry a cross. Now, a couple of things I want to say about this. You notice this. Remember back in chapter 5 when Jesus said, if they force you to go 1 mile, go 2. One of these things is that someone would they could compel you to help them, like carry your bags, whatever. Here they just forced this man. Jesus, no doubt, so weak from the beatings, and so he probably was just physically unable to carry the crossbeam. They tied a crossbeam on their backs, and again, the whole point was not only meant to be humiliating but torturous. So they made this man, Cyrene, actually carry that crossbeam, carry his cross. Verse 33, when they came to the place called Golgotha, which means skull place, they gave him wine mixed with gall to drink. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. Now, this is kind of interesting because this was sort of a you could say a sedative. The concoction was meant to deaden the pain. And you can say it was, in a sense, an act of mercy. Notice Jesus refused it, however. And that is more thing. In other words, I think if I was going through, it's like, can I get more? Can you get more? But the idea was it helped in dealing with the pain. Verse 35, after crucifying him, they divided his clothes by casting lots. And they sat down, and they were guarding him there. And above his head, they put the charge against him in writing, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Now this again, which is the sad case. Notice when you say the injustice of this, this was meant to what? Here's what this man was, put it like this. Had Barabbas been crucified, which of course you could say Barabbas should have been crucified, but had Barabbas been crucified, they would have listed his charges: insurrection, murder. He murdered someone. But they could not, there was no crime. So it's like, okay, he's King of the Jews. That's his crime. That's what he's being crucified for. Verse 38, then two criminals, which were crucified with him, one on the right hand and one on the left. And I'll save the other one for Luke, because one of the criminals, of course, actually comes to faith here on the cross. But verse 39, it says, those who passed by were yelling insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, the one who demolished the sanctuary and rebuilt it in 3 days, save yourself if you are the Son of God. Come down from the cross. In the same way, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders mocked him and said, he saved others, but he cannot save himself. He is King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe him. Now I'm going to stop here for a moment because a couple of things I want to say about this, because actually they are lying. Think about this for a moment. They claim that if he came down from the cross, they would believe him. Right? But that's simply not true. Jesus had just spent 3 years working miracles, raising the dead. Some of them got healed. So even if Jesus came down from the cross, no, they wouldn't believe him. They wouldn't believe him at all. Now, verse 44, let me come back to this. Verse 43, he says, he put his trust in God. Let him rescue him now, if he wants him. Okay, if he wants him. For he said, I am God's son. Verse 44, in the same way, even the criminals were crucified with him and kept taunting him. Okay, I want to show you this by way of apologetics here. Okay, so this is kind of a sidebar here. One, remember the Pharisees knew the law. And so the first thing I want to say is, as they're saying these words, I have to wonder if they are wondering, oh, I'm fulfilling prophecy again, right? Remember when they had the 30 pieces of silver that they paid out and they bought the potter's field? So keep in mind the Pharisees who knew the scriptures, and now they are fulfilling prophecies again, right? I just kind of wonder what's going through their minds when they said that. I kind of have to wonder, is like, oh, I'm fulfilling prophecy. Now, another thing from an apologetic perspective. Oh, let me show you this, by the way, too. Um, because this is what the Pharisees would have had to know. This is in Psalm 22. Now, look at this, verse 7. He says, everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer and they shake their heads. He relies on the Lord. Let him rescue him. Let the Lord deliver him, since he takes pleasure in him. And they took me from the room, making secure. I'll stop right there. But again, so they're almost word for word acting out this scene. Okay, more to their condemnation than anything else. But from an apologetics perspective, so far we've seen a couple of things here that I think is important. Critics sometimes will say that there were, in the gospel, there were things that were self-fulfilling prophecies. So, for example, Jesus could have, if he was a con man, he could have read the Psalms and he could have rode in on the donkey. Okay, although producing the crowd's reaction would have been hard. So some of the things that he could not predict or have a self-fulfilling prophecy or self-fulfill is, when the soldiers, let me go back to that, let's see. I'm gonna find it because the soldiers actually fulfill prophecy too. Let me go on to the cross again. Where is it? I just had it again. This, by the way, all of this scene, by the way, has been prophesied, but I wanted to. Where is it? All right, I can't find it. I can't find it because I know it's right there. But remember, they split his garment, and I know probably where it's at. It's probably when they. Let me see. I probably didn't go back far enough. It's kind of bugging me now. All right, it's here, but I just cannot. Oh, not there. Okay. All right. Anyway, it basically, that was a fulfilled prophecy that they would split his garment in two, and that they would cast lots for it. So my point is, you can't predict something like that, and even the Pharisees themselves saying their arch enemies fulfilling the very prophecy that they certainly would not want fulfilled. But anyway, okay, so when he says here again, he trusts in God. And by the way, remember this mockery here, Luke tells us again that one of the things that's going on here is the power of darkness. In a sense, you could say that all this time that they've been trying to kill Jesus, the restraints have kind of been rolled back by God, and Jesus is absorbing the full brunt of this wrath here. Okay, but he's doing it also, remember, for us. So verse 45, he says, from noon unto 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the whole land. Kind of an ominous sign here, right? Again, you can't self-fulfill that. Verse 46, and about 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And for those of you that want to know, this is not tongues or speaking of tongues. Now, remember, Jesus is hanging on the cross, He is hanging on the cross from noon to 3. Early in the morning up until this time, remember it was the trial. And then from noon to 3, and that actually is going to be even go further on, he's hanging on the cross. Verse 47, when some of those standing there heard this, they said, he's calling for Elijah. And immediately one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine. I don't even know what sour wine is. He says, fix it on a reed, and offered him a drink. But the rest said, let's see if Elijah comes and saves him. Now, it's kind of interesting. Remember, Jesus asked them, who do the people say that I am? And they said, well, some said Elijah. Very interesting. So, verse 50. Actually, guys, I think I'm running out of time here. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to pick it up at verse 50 here, because I'm kind of out of time here. I'm going to pick it up in the next study right there. But as we can see, this, I think to keep in mind as we look back on this crucifixion, this is the offering, the sin offering, that Jesus is taking our sin in his body. So as much as we could probably say, yeah, the injustice of it, and it was, we cry about injustice all the time, right? But think about this injustice here. And by the way, Jesus could have if he just uttered one word, he could have let himself go. But remember, as he told Peter, when Peter told him, save yourself, he said, how can the scriptures be, after rebuking Jesus, of course. But all right, everyone, I'm going to pick it up right there at verse 50 in the next study. Okay, then I'll see you in the next study. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I'll see you next time.